The autumn morning mist clung to the ancient walls of Windsor Castle as security guard Thomas Mitchell began his routine patrol through the royal archives. 23 years of service had taught him to notice every detail, every shadow that seemed out of place, every sound that didn't belong to the natural rhythm of the centuries-old building. The Royal Archives housed some of Britain's most precious historical documents, from medieval manuscripts to modern diplomatic correspondence, all carefully catalogued and protected, under layers of security that most people never even knew existed. Thomas had always taken pride in his work. Unlike the guards who stood ceremonially outside the palace gates, his job required him to move silently through corridors that few people ever saw, protecting treasures that most of the world would never glimpse. He knew every creak of the floorboards, every draft that whistled through the ancient stonework, every reflection of light that danced across the glass cases containing priceless artifacts. On this particular morning, however, something felt different. As he approached Section 7, where the most sensitive contemporary royal documents were stored, he noticed that one of the heavy oak doors stood slightly ajar. The electronic lock showed green, indicating it had been properly accessed with an authorized key card, but protocol demanded that all doors remain sealed during off hours. Thomas frowned, checking his watch. It was barely 6 in the morning, well before any of the archivists or researchers would typically arrive for work. He approached the door cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the radio clipped to his belt. Through the gap, he could see the soft glow of the climate-controlled room's lighting system, which should have been dimmed to its lowest setting. Someone was definitely inside, and they had been there long enough to trigger the full illumination protocol that activated when motion was detected for extended periods. Thomas pushed the door open wider and stepped inside, his soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished floor. The room stretched before him, lined with temperature and humidity-controlled cases containing documents that chronicled the modern royal family's most private moments. Marriage certificates, divorce papers, medical records, personal correspondence, financial documents, and diplomatic communications were all stored here with the highest level of security clearance required for access. At the far end of the room, silhouetted against the pale morning light filtering through the tall windows, stood a figure in an elegant navy coat. The person was leaning over one of the open cases, carefully photographing documents with what appeared to be a high-resolution camera. Even from behind, Thomas immediately recognized the distinctive posture and carefully styled hair of Queen Camilla. His first instinct was to retreat and pretend he had seen nothing. After all, as Queen Consort, surely Camilla had every right to access any documents in the royal archives. But something about the scene troubled him deeply. The secretive nature of her visit, the early hour, the fact that she was alone without any of the usual accompaniment of private secretaries or security personnel, and most concerning of all, the way she was systematically photographing documents rather than simply reading them. Thomas remained motionless in the shadows near the entrance, watching as Camilla moved from case to case with practiced efficiency. She seemed to know exactly what she was looking for, targeting specific files with a precision that suggested careful planning rather than casual browsing. Her movements were quick and decisive, as if she was working against a deadline or trying to complete her task before someone might discover her. The documents she was photographing appeared to be from various time periods spanning the last several decades. Thomas could make out folders marked with dates from the 90s through the present day, and many bore the distinctive red classification stamps that indicated the highest levels of confidentiality. These were not the kind of historical documents that researchers might access for academic purposes, but rather the raw, unfiltered records of royal family decisions, conflicts, and private communications. As Thomas continued to observe, Camilla pulled out what appeared to be a small external storage device, connecting it to her camera to download the images she had captured. The soft beeping of the device seemed unnaturally loud in the hushed atmosphere of the archives, and Thomas found himself holding his breath, afraid that any sound might give away his presence. What disturbed Thomas most was not just what Camilla was doing, but how she was doing it. There was nothing casual or academic about her approach. She moved with the efficiency of someone conducting surveillance or gathering intelligence, checking her watch frequently and occasionally glancing toward the door as if expecting to be interrupted. This was not a queen consort researching family history. but someone systematically documenting sensitive information for purposes that were not immediately apparent. The documents themselves told a story that Thomas could only partially piece together from his vantage point. He could see correspondence bearing the letterheads of various government departments, financial institutions, and foreign diplomatic missions. There were folders marked with the names of senior royals, including several that appeared to reference Prince William specifically. The careful way Camilla handled these particular documents, spending extra time photographing them from multiple angles, suggested that they contained information of particular interest to her. As the morning light grew stronger, Camilla's movements became more hurried. She began closing cases and returning documents to their proper positions with the same systematic approach she had used to access them. Thomas realized that she was preparing to leave and that he would need to make a decision about what, if anything, he should do with what he had witnessed. The professional security training that had been drilled into Thomas over more than 2 decades told him that any unauthorized access to classified materials, regardless of who was conducting it, should be reported immediately through proper channels. But the political reality of his situation was far more complicated. This was not some random intruder or even a minor royal overstepping their bounds, but the queen consort herself, the wife of the reigning monarch. Yet something about the entire scene felt fundamentally wrong to Thomas. The secrecy, the systematic photographing of documents, the early morning timing designed to avoid detection, all suggested that whatever Camilla was doing was not sanctioned by normal royal protocols. If her research was legitimate, why conduct it in such a clandestine manner? Why not request official access through the proper channels that existed for senior royals who needed to review family documents? As Camilla gathered her materials and prepared to leave, Thomas made a decision that would ultimately change the course of royal history. He quietly activated the recording function on his security device, a small camera that all guards carried to document any unusual incidents during their shifts. The device captured clear footage of Camilla's final moments in the archives, including her careful removal of the external storage device and her methodical closing of the document cases. The irony was not lost on Thomas, that he was now doing exactly what he had observed Camilla doing, documenting evidence of activities that were taking place in the shadows of official royal business. But whereas Camilla's actions felt secretive and potentially harmful, Thomas justified his recording as a necessary protection of the security protocols he had sworn to uphold. When Camilla finally left the archives, Thomas waited several minutes before emerging from his hiding place. He immediately conducted a thorough inspection of the section she had accessed, checking to ensure that all documents were properly secured and that no physical materials had been removed. Everything appeared to be in order, but the electronic access logs would show exactly which cases had been opened and when, creating a permanent record of the unauthorized activity. As Thomas completed his patrol and prepared his incident report, he found himself grappling with the potential consequences of what he had witnessed. He knew that reporting the incident could end his career and potentially expose him to legal action, especially if Camilla's activities were somehow authorized at levels above his security clearance. But he also knew that failing to report such a significant breach of archive security could be seen as a dereliction of his duty and could potentially compromise the integrity of the entire royal document collection. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on Thomas's mind as he considered not just the immediate consequences, but the broader implications of what Camilla might be planning to do with the information she had gathered. The systematic nature of her documentation suggested a purpose that went beyond mere curiosity about family history. Someone with her level of access to royal information would not need to conduct secret photography sessions unless they were preparing to use the documents in ways that would not normally be permitted. By the time Thomas submitted his preliminary report to his immediate supervisor, the sun had fully risen over Windsor Castle, and the archives were preparing to open for another day of normal operations. But Thomas knew that nothing about the royal family's relationship with their own history would ever be quite the same again. The photographs on Camilla's camera and storage device represented a fundamental shift in the balance of power within the royal family, though the full implications of that shift would not become apparent until much later. The report that Thomas filed that morning would eventually make its way up through layers of security, personnel, private secretaries, and senior advisors before finally reaching Prince William himself. But for now, as the castle awakened to another day of official duties and public engagements, Only Thomas knew that the foundations of royal trust and family loyalty had been quietly undermined in the pre-dawn hours of what had seemed like an ordinary autumn morning. 3 days passed before Thomas Mitchell's incident report reached the desk of Sir Edward Thornbury, the senior private secretary responsible for royal security protocols. Sir Edward had served the royal family for over 30 years, navigating countless delicate situations with the discretion and political acumen that had made him indispensable to 3 generations of monarchs. However, nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for the explosive allegations contained in the security guard's meticulously detailed report. Sir Edward read through the document twice, his practiced diplomatic composure gradually giving way to barely concealed alarm. The report described not just a breach of security protocols, but potentially the most serious internal threat to royal stability that the institution had faced in decades. If Thomas Mitchell's observations were accurate, and the accompanying digital evidence appeared to support his claims, then Queen Camilla had conducted what could only be described as an intelligence-gathering operation against her own family. The implications were staggering. The documents that Camilla had photographed contained some of the most sensitive information relating to the royal family's private affairs, financial arrangements, and political relationships. More troubling still was the apparent focus on material specifically related to Prince William and his future role as heir to the throne. The systematic nature of Camilla's documentation suggested a level of planning and purpose that went far beyond casual curiosity about family history. Sir Edward immediately convened a confidential meeting with 2 of his most trusted colleagues, Dame Margaret Ashworth, the Keeper of Royal Archives, and Colonel James Whitfield, head of Royal Protection Services. The 3 of them had worked together for years, handling everything from minor protocol breaches to major security threats. But the gravity of this situation was unlike anything they had previously encountered. Dame Margaret was visibly shaken as she reviewed the access logs from the archive's electronic security system. The data confirmed that Camilla's keycard had been used to enter Section 7 at 5:45 in the morning and that she had accessed 7 different document cases over the course of nearly 2 hours. The timestamp data correlated perfectly with Thomas Mitchell's observations, lending credibility to every aspect of his report. Colonel Whitfield's concerns were more immediate and practical. As head of royal protection, he was responsible for ensuring that no individual, regardless of their position within the family, posed a threat to the security or stability of the monarchy. The fact that such a threat might come from the Queen Consort herself presented unprecedented challenges for his department and for the institution as a whole. The 3 senior officials spent hours reviewing the evidence and discussing possible responses. They examined the digital footage that Thomas had captured, which clearly showed Camilla photographing documents and transferring digital files to an external storage device. They cross-referenced the access logs with the archive's inventory system to identify exactly which documents had been compromised. They analyzed Camilla's recent schedule and activities to determine whether her archive visit was part of a larger pattern of unusual behavior. What they discovered was even more disturbing than the initial incident report had suggested. A careful review of security footage from other royal properties revealed that Camilla had made unauthorized visits to archive facilities at Buckingham Palace and Balmoral Castle over the previous 6 weeks. In each case, she had gained access during unusual hours and had spent extended periods in areas housing sensitive family documents. The pattern was clear and deeply troubling. Camilla was systematically gathering information about the royal family's most private affairs, focusing particularly on documents related to succession planning, financial arrangements, and diplomatic relationships. The scope of her intelligence-gathering operations suggested months of careful planning and indicated objectives that extended far beyond anything that could be justified as legitimate research. Sir Edward faced the most difficult decision of his long career. Protocol demanded that he report the security breach to King Charles immediately, but the personal and political ramifications of such a revelation could destabilize the monarchy itself. Charles had only recently ascended to the throne, and his marriage to Camilla had already weathered decades of public scrutiny and family tension. Accusations that his wife was conducting covert operations against other family members could trigger a constitutional crisis. The alternative, however, was equally troubling. Allowing Camilla's activities to continue unchecked could enable her to gather intelligence that might be used to manipulate or blackmail other members of the royal family. The documents she had accessed contained information about Prince William's preparations for his future role as king, details about the family's financial arrangements, and records of private communications that could be weaponized in various ways. After extensive consultation with his colleagues, Sir Edward made the decision to conduct a more comprehensive investigation before briefing King Charles. He authorized Colonel Whitfield to implement enhanced surveillance of Camilla's movements and communications, while Dame Margaret began a detailed audit of all documents that had been accessed during her unauthorized visits. Thomas Mitchell was instructed to maintain absolute confidentiality while continuing his normal duties, with the understanding that his future testimony might be required in formal proceedings. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of Camilla's intelligence-gathering operation. Enhanced surveillance showed that she had been meeting regularly with several individuals who had no official connection to royal business, including a former journalist known for his investigative work on political scandals, and a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud cases. Phone records indicated extensive communications with offshore legal firms and financial consultants, suggesting that the information she was gathering was being analyzed by outside experts. Most alarming of all was the discovery that Camilla had been systematically copying and organizing the stolen information into detailed dossiers focusing on different members of the royal family. Intelligence analysts brought in to assess the scope of the operation concluded that she was building comprehensive files that could be used for blackmail, political manipulation, or public exposure of embarrassing family secrets. The investigation also revealed Camilla's apparent motivation for conducting such risky and potentially treasonous activities. Financial records showed that she had been quietly accumulating significant debts related to her extensive charitable activities and personal lifestyle expenses. Communications with her financial advisors indicated growing concern about her long-term financial security, particularly given the limited inheritance provisions that had been made for her in royal family estate planning. More significantly, intercepted communications suggested that Camilla was deeply concerned about her future status within the royal family following King Charles's eventual death. Unlike previous Queen's consort, she had no clear constitutional role to play after her husband's death, and there were indications that Prince William intended to significantly reduce her public profile and financial support once he became king. The intelligence that Camilla was gathering appeared to be intended as leverage to secure her position and financial future within the royal family. The documents she had stolen contained information about family financial arrangements, succession planning, and private conflicts that could be used to pressure William and other family members into more favorable arrangements for her long-term security. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Camilla's operation was far more sophisticated and dangerous than anyone had initially realized. She was not simply a curious stepmother interested in family history, but a calculating political operative who was willing to betray the most fundamental principles of royal loyalty and trust to protect her own interests. The evidence assembled by Sir Edward and his team painted a picture of systematic treachery that struck at the heart of everything the monarchy represented. Camilla had exploited her privileged position as queen consort to gather intelligence that could be used to manipulate or destroy other members of the family. Her actions represented not just a personal betrayal, but a fundamental threat to the stability and integrity of the institution itself. As Sir Edward prepared to brief King Charles on the investigation's findings, he knew that the revelation would shatter the family and potentially trigger the most serious constitutional crisis in modern royal history. The woman Charles had married for love, defended against decades of public criticism, and elevated to the highest position in British society, had systematically betrayed everything he and his family represented. The weight of that betrayal would fall most heavily on Prince William, whose private documents and future plans had been the primary target of Camilla's intelligence-gathering operation. The heir to the throne would soon learn that his stepmother had been preparing to wage war against him, using the most intimate details of his life as weapons. The stage was set for a confrontation that would tear the royal family apart and force them to choose between preserving the monarchy and protecting themselves from the woman who had systematically betrayed their trust. The investigation was complete, and the evidence was overwhelming, But the most difficult decision still lay ahead. The morning Sir Edward Thornbury requested an urgent private audience with King Charles. The atmosphere at Clarence House was already tense with unspoken concerns. Charles had noticed subtle changes in his household's dynamics over recent weeks, though he attributed them to the natural adjustments that came with his new role as monarch. Staff members seemed more guarded in their interactions. Private secretaries held hushed conversations that stopped when he approached, and even his most trusted advisors appeared to be weighing their words more carefully than usual. Sir Edward arrived at precisely 9 o'clock, carrying a leather briefcase that contained what would prove to be the most devastating intelligence report in modern royal history. Charles received him in his private study, a room lined with first-edition books and family photographs that had witnessed countless difficult conversations over the decades. Neither man could have predicted that this meeting would fundamentally alter the course of the monarchy and destroy the personal relationships that Charles had spent years carefully constructing. The presentation of evidence was methodical and devastating. Sir Edward began with Thomas Mitchell's initial incident report, walking Charles through the security guard's detailed observations of Camilla's unauthorized activities in the royal archives. The king's initial reaction was skeptical disbelief, followed by growing concern as the scope and precision of the evidence became apparent. The digital footage was particularly damning. Charles watched in stunned silence as security cameras captured his wife systematically photographing sensitive family documents, transferring digital files to external storage devices, and conducting what could only be described as a professional intelligence-gathering operation. The woman he had married for love, defended against decades of public criticism, and elevated to the position of queen consort, was revealed to be systematically betraying the most fundamental principles of royal trust. As Sir Edward continued his briefing, the full scope of Camilla's operation became clear. The investigation had uncovered unauthorized visits to multiple royal archives, meetings with outside consultants and investigators, and the creation of detailed dossiers containing the most sensitive information about family members' private affairs. The evidence suggested months of careful planning and indicated objectives that posed a direct threat to the stability of the monarchy itself. Charles found himself struggling to process the implications of what he was learning. The documents that Camilla had stolen included information about succession planning, family financial arrangements, diplomatic correspondence, and private communications that could be weaponized in countless ways. Most disturbing of all was the clear focus on materials related to Prince William, suggesting that her primary target was the heir to the throne and his future plans for the monarchy. The king's initial shock gradually gave way to a complex mixture of betrayal, anger, and profound sadness. This was not just a security breach or a political crisis, but a personal catastrophe that struck at the very core of his identity and relationships. The woman he had loved and supported through decades of public scrutiny had systematically deceived him while exploiting her privileged position to gather intelligence against his own family. Sir Edward's briefing concluded with an analysis of Camilla's apparent motivations, based on financial records, intercepted communications, and expert assessment of her activities. The intelligence suggested that she was deeply concerned about her future financial security and constitutional position following Charles's eventual death. The information she was gathering appeared to be intended as leverage to force Prince William and other family members into more favorable long-term arrangements for her benefit. When the briefing finally ended, Charles sat in stunned silence for several minutes, staring at the photographs and documents that documented his wife's treachery. The magnitude of her betrayal was almost impossible to comprehend, and the potential consequences for the monarchy were equally staggering. If the stolen information were to be made public or used for blackmail, it could trigger the most serious constitutional crisis in centuries. Charles's first instinct was to confront Camilla directly, to demand an explanation and give her an opportunity to defend herself against the overwhelming evidence. But Sir Edward strongly advised against any immediate confrontation, warning that Camilla might destroy evidence, contact her outside collaborators, or take other actions that could compound the damage she had already caused. Instead, Charles authorized Sir Edward to brief Prince William on the investigation's findings before any confrontation with Camilla took place. William, as the primary target of her intelligence-gathering operation and the future king, needed to understand the threat he was facing and the decisions that would need to be made to protect the monarchy's integrity. The meeting between Charles and William took place the following evening at Windsor Castle, in the same private apartments where generations of royals had gathered to discuss matters of state and family. William arrived expecting a routine briefing on administrative matters, but quickly realized from his father's demeanor that something far more serious was at stake. Charles's explanation of Camilla's activities was halting and emotional, interrupted by long pauses as he struggled to articulate the depth of her betrayal. William listened with growing incredulity and anger, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting to review specific pieces of evidence. The revelation that his stepmother had been systematically gathering intelligence about his private affairs and future plans triggered a fury that Charles had rarely seen from his typically controlled eldest son. William's response was immediate and uncompromising. He demanded that Camilla be confronted immediately and that she be stripped of all access to royal archives, family documents, and sensitive information. He insisted that criminal charges should be considered for what amounted to treason against the crown, and he made it clear that he would never trust her with any aspect of royal business again. The conversation between father and son revealed fundamental differences in their assessment of how to handle the crisis. Charles was torn between his personal love for Camilla and his duty to protect the monarchy, while William saw the situation in stark terms of betrayal and institutional security. The heir to the throne made it clear that he viewed Camilla's actions as an unforgivable assault on everything the royal family represented. As they debated possible responses, both men were forced to confront the broader implications of Camilla's betrayal for the future of the monarchy. William's eventual reign would now be shaped by the knowledge that his stepmother had attempted to gather intelligence that could be used against him. The trust and family unity that Charles had worked decades to build had been systematically undermined by the woman he had made queen consort. The decision to confront Camilla was ultimately made jointly by father and son, though their motivations were very different. Charles hoped that a direct confrontation might lead to some explanation or reconciliation, while William was determined to ensure that she understood the consequences of her actions and could never again pose a threat to royal security. The confrontation took place 3 days later in Charles's private study at Clarence House. Camilla entered the room expecting a routine meeting with her husband, but immediately sensed from the presence of Sir Edward and the formal atmosphere that something significant was wrong. Charles began by presenting her with copies of the evidence that had been gathered, watching her face carefully as she reviewed the photographs, access logs, and surveillance footage that documented her unauthorized activities. Camilla's initial response was denial and confusion, claiming that she had been conducting legitimate research into family history and that her visits to the archives had been misunderstood by overzealous security personnel. But as Charles methodically presented more evidence, including recordings of her meetings with outside consultants and copies of the dossier she had been compiling, her denials became increasingly hollow. The confrontation escalated quickly as Camilla realized that her activities had been comprehensively documented and that denial was no longer a viable strategy. She shifted to justification, arguing that she had a right to understand her family's history and to protect her own interests in an institution that had never fully accepted her. She claimed that her research was defensive rather than aggressive, intended to protect herself from potential attacks rather than to harm other family members. Charles's response was measured but devastating. He explained that her actions constituted a fundamental betrayal of trust that struck at the heart of everything the monarchy represented. He detailed the potential damage that her intelligence gathering could cause to family relationships, institutional stability, and public confidence in the royal family. Most importantly, he made it clear that her actions had irreparably damaged their personal relationship and her position within the family. The confrontation concluded with Charles's announcement of immediate consequences for Camilla's betrayal. Her access to all royal archives would be permanently revoked, her security clearance would be stripped, and her future role in royal activities would be severely limited. She would retain her title as queen consort, but her practical influence within the institution would be essentially eliminated. Camilla's final response revealed the calculation and entitlement that had motivated her actions from the beginning. Rather than expressing remorse or seeking forgiveness, She warned Charles that the information she had gathered still existed and that attempts to marginalize her could result in public revelations that would damage the entire royal family. Her threat made it clear that she viewed the stolen intelligence as leverage to be used in future conflicts, rather than as evidence of wrongdoing that required accountability. The meeting ended with Charles and Camilla's relationship fundamentally and permanently altered. The trust that had sustained their marriage through decades of public scrutiny had been destroyed by her systematic betrayal, and the unity that Charles had worked to build within the royal family had been shattered by her calculated assault on family loyalty. The weeks following Camilla's confrontation were marked by an atmosphere of crisis and uncertainty that permeated every level of the royal household. Charles found himself grappling with the most difficult decision of his reign, torn between his personal feelings for his wife and his duty to protect the monarchy from the ongoing threat her actions represented. The stolen intelligence remained in Camilla's possession despite demands for its return, and her barely concealed threats to use it if she were further marginalized created an impossible situation for the entire royal family. Prince William's response to the crisis was swift and decisive. Within days of learning about Camilla's betrayal, he convened a series of private meetings with senior royal advisors, constitutional experts, and security officials to assess the full scope of the threat and develop strategies for protecting the monarchy's interests. Unlike his father, William viewed the situation in purely institutional terms rather than personal ones, and he was determined to ensure that Camilla could never again exploit her position to harm the royal family. The heir to the throne's assessment was brutal in its clarity. Camilla had demonstrated that she was willing to betray the most fundamental principles of royal loyalty and trust to advance her personal interests. The intelligence she had gathered posed an ongoing threat to family privacy, institutional stability, and the constitutional integrity of the monarchy itself. Most critically, her threats to use the stolen information if she were marginalized showed that she viewed her betrayal as leverage rather than wrongdoing that required accountability. William's conclusion was uncompromising. Camilla represented an existential threat to the monarchy that could not be managed or contained through partial measures. As long as she retained access to royal facilities, family members, and sensitive information, she would continue to pose a danger to the institution and its members. The only acceptable solution was her complete removal from any position of influence or access within the royal family. The constitutional and practical challenges of implementing such a decision were enormous. Camilla was the queen consort, married to the reigning monarch, and her public disgrace could trigger precisely the kind of scandal and institutional crisis that William was trying to prevent. However, allowing her to continue operating within the royal family while possessing stolen intelligence was equally unacceptable, as it would create ongoing opportunities for blackmail and manipulation. William's strategy focused on building an unassailable case for Camilla's removal that would be supported by senior advisors, government officials, and other family members. He commissioned detailed legal analyses of the constitutional options available for addressing her betrayal, while also working with security officials to assess the ongoing threat posed by her possession of stolen intelligence. The legal research revealed several precedents for removing members of the royal family from positions of influence following serious misconduct, though none directly addressed the unique situation of a queen consort who had committed what amounted to treason against her own family. Constitutional experts concluded that while Camilla could not be stripped of her title without parliamentary action, her access to royal facilities, information, and activities could be permanently revoked through executive decisions by the king. More importantly, the legal analysis revealed that Camilla's possession and threatened use of stolen royal intelligence could constitute criminal activity that warranted prosecution under national security laws. The systematic nature of her intelligence gathering, combined with her meetings with outside consultants and creation of detailed dossiers, suggested a level of planning and execution that went far beyond family disputes and into the realm of genuine espionage. William used this legal foundation to build support among senior royal advisors and government officials who would be essential for implementing any major changes to Camilla's status. His briefings to these key stakeholders were comprehensive and devastating, presenting the evidence of her betrayal alongside expert assessments of the ongoing threat she represented to royal security and constitutional stability. The response from senior officials was uniformly supportive of William's position. Sir Edward Thornbury, who had initially discovered the extent of Camilla's activities, provided detailed testimony about the scope of her intelligence gathering and the potential damage it could cause if the stolen information were made public. Colonel Whitfield outlined the security implications of allowing someone who had demonstrated such fundamental disloyalty to retain access to royal facilities and family members. Dame Margaret Ashworth's assessment was particularly damaging to any argument for allowing Camilla to retain her current position. As keeper of the royal archives, she detailed the specific documents that had been compromised and explained how the stolen information could be used to manipulate government policy, undermine diplomatic relationships, and expose private family matters that could destabilize the monarchy. Government officials who were briefed on the situation expressed grave concern about the national security implications of Camilla's actions. The stolen documents included diplomatic correspondence, financial records, and constitutional planning materials that could be of significant interest to foreign intelligence services or domestic political opponents of the monarchy. Her meetings with outside consultants and investigators raised additional concerns about how widely the stolen information might have been shared. As William built his case for decisive action against Camilla, Charles found himself increasingly isolated in his attempts to find a middle path that might preserve both his marriage and the monarchy's integrity. The king's advisors were unanimous in their assessment that Camilla posed an ongoing threat that could not be managed through partial measures, while his son was equally determined to ensure that she could never again exploit her position to harm the royal family. The breaking point came when intelligence officials intercepted communications indicating that Camilla was actively negotiating with a prominent investigative journalist about the potential publication of selected royal documents. The journalist, known for his aggressive reporting on political scandals, had apparently been provided with samples of the stolen intelligence to demonstrate the scope and sensitivity of the information Camilla possessed. This development transformed the crisis from a family matter into an immediate threat to national security and constitutional stability. The prospect of royal family secrets being published in the media represented exactly the kind of institutional damage that William had warned could result from allowing Camilla to retain possession of stolen intelligence while feeling increasingly marginalized within the family. Charles's response to this escalation was swift and decisive. Within hours of learning about Camilla's negotiations with the journalist, he authorized Sir Edward to implement the most comprehensive sanctions possible against the Queen Consort. Her security clearance was immediately revoked, her access to all royal facilities was permanently terminated, and her participation in official royal activities was suspended indefinitely. More significantly, Charles authorized legal action to recover the stolen intelligence and prevent its publication or further distribution. Royal lawyers filed court orders seeking the return of all stolen documents and the deletion of digital copies, while also pursuing criminal charges against anyone who had assisted Camilla in her unauthorized activities. The legal action represented a point of no return in the royal family's response to Camilla's betrayal. By pursuing criminal charges and public court proceedings, Charles was acknowledging that the situation had moved beyond the realm of private family disputes and into the arena of national security and constitutional law. William's reaction to his father's decision was one of satisfaction and relief. The heir to the throne had argued from the beginning that Camilla's actions constituted treason that required the strongest possible response, and the king's authorization of legal action represented validation of that position. However, William also recognized that the public nature of the legal proceedings would inevitably expose the royal family to exactly the kind of scandal and media scrutiny that they had been trying to avoid. The decision to pursue legal action against Camilla also had profound implications for Charles personally. By authorizing criminal charges against his wife, he was effectively acknowledging that their marriage could not survive her betrayal, and that his duty to protect the monarchy took precedence over his personal relationships. The man who had waited decades to marry the woman he loved was now being forced to choose between that love and the institution he was sworn to serve. As legal proceedings began, and the scope of Camilla's betrayal became public knowledge, the royal family found itself facing the most serious crisis of loyalty and trust in modern history. The institution that had survived world wars, political upheavals, and countless personal scandals was now being tested by treachery from within its own highest ranks. The stage was set for William's ultimate decision about Camilla's future relationship with the royal family, a decision that would determine not only her fate, but the precedent for how the monarchy would handle internal threats to its security and integrity. The heir to the throne held the power to ensure that Camilla could never again access royal archives or exploit her position to harm the family. But using that power would require him to take actions that would forever change the nature of royal relationships and institutional trust. The final meeting between Prince William and his father took place on a gray December morning at Windsor Castle, in the same oak-paneled study where medieval kings had made decisions that shaped the destiny of nations. Charles looked older than his years, the weight of recent events having carved new lines around his eyes and a permanent tension in his shoulders that spoke to the enormous personal cost of the choices he was being forced to make. William arrived with a leather portfolio containing what he termed the final solution to the Camilla crisis, a comprehensive plan that would permanently remove her as a threat to royal security while protecting the monarchy from further damage. The legal proceedings against Camilla had been proceeding for 3 weeks, and the early discovery process had revealed the full extent of her betrayal in devastating detail. Court filings showed that she had systematically photographed over 800 sensitive documents spanning 4 decades of royal family history. The stolen intelligence included financial records that could expose the family's private wealth, diplomatic correspondence that could damage Britain's international relationships, and personal communications that contained embarrassing details about family conflicts and private medical information. Most damaging of all was the revelation that Camilla had indeed provided samples of the stolen documents to investigative journalists and foreign intelligence contacts, apparently as part of negotiations for future collaboration or protection. Intercepted communications showed that she had been exploring options for monetizing the intelligence through book deals, documentary projects, and consulting arrangements that would have turned royal family secrets into personal profit. William's portfolio contained a detailed analysis of the constitutional and legal options available for addressing Camilla's ongoing threat to royal security. The research, conducted by the most senior constitutional lawyers in Britain, had identified a precedent that would allow for Camilla's complete banishment from royal properties and activities without requiring parliamentary action or public scandal. The precedent dated to the 18th century, when King George II had used executive royal prerogative to permanently exclude his own son from court activities following a series of treasonous plots against the crown. The legal mechanism, known as a royal exclusion order, had been used sparingly throughout British history, but remained a valid constitutional tool for protecting the monarchy from internal threats to its security and integrity. William's proposal was comprehensive and irreversible. The royal exclusion order would permanently ban Camilla from entering any royal property, accessing any royal documents or information, and participating in any official or unofficial royal activities. She would retain her title as Queen Consort, but the title would become purely ceremonial with no practical authority or access to royal resources. The order would also establish a comprehensive monitoring system to ensure that she had no further contact with royal family members or staff. The legal framework for the exclusion order was particularly sophisticated, incorporating elements of national security law that would make any violation a criminal offense punishable by imprisonment. Camilla would be required to surrender all stolen documents and digital files, undergo periodic security interviews to ensure compliance with the order, and accept permanent surveillance by Royal Protection Services to prevent future intelligence gathering activities. Charles listened to his son's presentation in silence, occasionally asking for clarification about specific legal provisions but never challenging the fundamental premise that Camilla needed to be permanently removed from royal life. The king's acceptance of William's proposal was perhaps the most painful decision of his reign, as it represented not only the end of his marriage, but also the acknowledgement that his personal judgment had been catastrophically flawed. The conversation between father and son revealed the profound emotional toll that Camilla's betrayal had taken on Charles personally. The man who had defended her against decades of public criticism, who had insisted on her acceptance within the royal family, and who had elevated her to the highest position in British society, was now being forced to admit that she had systematically deceived and betrayed him from the very beginning of their relationship. William's presentation included a psychological assessment of Camilla's behavior that painted a disturbing picture of calculated manipulation and long-term deception. Expert analysis of her activities suggested that she had been gathering intelligence about royal family members for years, possibly even before her marriage to Charles, and that her apparent loyalty and devotion had been carefully constructed facades designed to gain access to sensitive information and strategic positions. The assessment concluded that Camilla represented what intelligence professionals termed a trusted insider threat, someone who exploits their privileged access and personal relationships to conduct espionage or intelligence-gathering activities. The psychological profile suggested that she was unlikely to reform her behavior or accept limitations on her activities, making permanent exclusion the only viable option for protecting royal security. Charles's authorization of the royal exclusion order was signed with a heavy hand, the ink on the document representing not just a legal decision, but the formal end of a relationship that had shaped decades of his life. The order would take effect immediately upon Camilla's service with the legal documents, and royal protection services were already positioned to ensure her immediate removal from all royal properties. The implementation of the exclusion order was swift and comprehensive. Camilla was served with the legal documents while at Clarence House, and she was given precisely 2 hours to collect personal belongings before being permanently barred from the property. Royal protection officers supervised her packing to ensure that no documents or electronic devices containing royal information left with her, and her final exit from the house was conducted with the same security protocols used for removing foreign spies from government facilities. Camilla's response to the exclusion order was a mixture of rage, disbelief, and desperate attempts at negotiation. She demanded to speak directly with Charles, who refused to meet with her again, and she threatened to release the stolen intelligence to the media if the order was not rescinded. These threats only served to confirm the wisdom of William's decision to pursue the most comprehensive sanctions possible, as they demonstrated that Camilla continued to view her betrayal as leverage rather than criminal activity that required accountability. The legal consequences of Camilla's intelligence-gathering activities extended far beyond her removal from royal life. Criminal charges were filed for violation of the Official Secrets Act, unauthorized access to classified materials, and conspiracy to commit espionage. The charges carried potential sentences of up to 20 years in prison, though prosecutors indicated willingness to consider plea agreements that would ensure the return of all stolen documents and cooperation with ongoing security reviews. Perhaps most significantly, the criminal proceedings included charges against several of Camilla's outside collaborators, including the investigative journalist who had been negotiating for publication rights to the stolen documents, and the private investigator who had helped her organize and analyze the intelligence. These additional prosecutions sent a clear message that anyone who assisted in betraying royal security would face the full force of the law. The public response to news of Camilla's banishment was mixed, but largely supportive of the royal family's decision to take decisive action against what was clearly described as treasonous behavior. Media coverage focused on the systematic nature of her intelligence gathering and the potential damage that could have resulted from publication or foreign exploitation of the stolen documents. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for protecting royal privacy and security, even at the cost of removing the Queen Consort from her position. International reaction was more complex, with foreign governments quietly reassessing their intelligence-sharing relationships with Britain and their diplomatic protocols for dealing with senior royal family members. Several allied nations requested briefings on the scope of Camilla's intelligence gathering to determine whether their own classified information had been compromised through her access to British diplomatic records. William's role in orchestrating Camilla's banishment established him as the undisputed leader of the royal family's response to internal security threats. His decisive action in building the legal and political case for her removal demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking and institutional loyalty that would characterize his future reign as king. The heir to the throne had successfully protected the monarchy from its most serious internal threat, while establishing precedents for dealing with similar challenges in the future. The aftermath of the royal exclusion order left Charles emotionally devastated, but institutionally stronger. The king's willingness to sacrifice his personal relationship to protect the monarchy's integrity demonstrated his commitment to duty over personal considerations, while also removing a source of ongoing instability and security concern. The painful lesson of Camilla's betrayal would shape his approach to trust and security for the remainder of his reign. The royal archives that had been the target of Camilla's intelligence gathering were completely restructured, with enhanced security protocols and access restrictions. Thomas Mitchell, the security guard whose vigilance had first detected Camilla's unauthorized activities, was promoted to head of archive security and became a symbol of the institutional loyalty and professional dedication that the monarchy valued above all other considerations. The royal exclusion order against Camilla became a permanent feature of royal security protocols, serving both as punishment for her betrayal and as a deterrent to anyone else who might consider exploiting their privileged access for personal gain. The comprehensive nature of her banishment ensured that she could never again pose a threat to royal security, while the legal proceedings that followed sent a clear message about the consequences of betraying institutional trust. In the end, William's decisive action had saved the monarchy from what could have been its most devastating scandal in centuries. The stolen intelligence that Camilla had gathered never reached public publication. The security breaches she had exploited were permanently closed, and the royal family had demonstrated its willingness to take the strongest possible action against internal threats to its integrity. The institution that had survived for over 1,000 years had once again proven its capacity to protect itself from those who would exploit its trust for personal gain.